In the winter of 1931, a woman in Cades Cove rose in the dark before her family woke and did three things that kept them alive. She raked the gray ash off the banked fire and found the orange coals still breathing underneath, right where she had left them at midnight. She pulled a string of dried apples down from the rafter and dropped them in the pot to soften. She cut a sliver of lye soap she had made in October from ashes and hog fat and washed in spring water that had not failed in 40 years. The coffee was not yet boiling. She had already lit the fire, fed the family, and cleaned her hands without spending a cent or leaving the room. She was not a survivalist. This was Tuesday. In the coves and hollers of the Great Smoky Mountains, a family did not survive alone because they were brave. They survived alone because there was no one else. The store was a day down the mountain. The doctor was further. So you made what you needed from what the mountain gave you. Soap from ash, light from tallow, sweetness from cane, medicine from the woods behind the barn. Then the park came. In 1934, the government drew a line around those mountains, and the families who had fed themselves on that ground for 100 years were paid out and moved off it. The cabins stayed, the smokehouses stayed, the people left, and the skills left with them. Not because the skills stopped working. They worked better than anything that replaced them. They were buried, slowly, quietly, under a way of living that taught you to buy the thing your grandmother made for pennies. Number 19 clothed a whole family through a winter with nothing but wool and a wheel. Number 9 fed them green vegetables in February from apples and beans strung up in September. And number 3, finding water that never quit, is the skill a man today pays a well company $300 just to guess at. Hit subscribe and let us count down the 25 lost Smoky Mountain skills every mountain family once depended on to survive alone, the ones they hoped you would forget. Number 25, reading the weather from sky, smoke, and animals. You watched the smoke off the chimney first thing. Smoke that hung low and crawled along the ground meant rain by evening. Smoke that climbed straight up meant a fair, cold day. Count a cricket's chirps for 15 seconds, then add 40. That was near the temperature. The mountain told you everything if you watched it long enough. No glass on the wall, no voice on a radio, just a sky you had read your whole life. Not a forecast, a habit of looking up. Number 24, weaving white oak baskets. You found a young white oak, straight-grained, and split it thin with a froe. You soaked the splits until they bent without breaking, then wove them over and under around a frame of bent ribs, pulling each row tight against the last. Split the oak along the grain, never across. A cross-grain split snaps the first time the basket carries weight. A good egg basket carried to market for 30 years. The store sold tin pails that rusted through in 2. The mountain grew the basket for free. He only had to read the tree. Number 23, making brooms from broomcorn. You grew a row of broomcorn at the garden's edge every year for this. You cut the seed heads, stripped the seed, and bound the straw tight around a shaved hickory handle. Bind it wet and let it dry on the handle. Wet straw shrinks tight and never works loose. One broom swept the cabin for a year, then went to the barn for another. This cost a row of seed and an evening, not bought, grown. Number 22, dipping tallow candles for light. You saved the tallow rendered from the hog and melted it slow in an iron pot. You tied cotton wicks to a stick, dipped them down into the fat, and lifted them to cool. 20 dips built a candle thick enough to burn an evening. Let each coat harden before the next, or the tallow slides off in a lump. A box of these lit the long winter nights. These cost a stick, a string, and fat they already had. Not darkness. Light you made yourself. Number 21. Keeping bees and robbing the bee gum. You kept your bees in a hollow black gum log stood on end and capped a bee gum. When the comb hung heavy in fall, you smoked the bees calm with a smoldering rag and lifted the honey out by hand. Smoke them slow and gentle. A hard smoke drives the whole hive out angry. Honey was the only sweetener besides sorghum, and it kept forever. The store sold white sugar for cash. The bee gum made sweetness from the mountain's own flowers, not a grocery, a gift you only had to gather.
Before we go on, I made something special for you. A guide for men like us who still believe a man should be able to fix his own home. It's the forgotten handyman secrets, the old-fashioned repair tricks our grandfathers used to fix anything around the house and keep it running for life. But these skills are disappearing fast, and once they're gone for good. Don't pay a repairman ever again. Scan the QR code on screen or click the link below. Go ahead, I'll wait right here.
Number 20. Quilting warmth out of scraps. You saved every worn-out shirt, every flour sack, every scrap too small to wear. You cut them into squares and pieced a top by lamplight through the winter. You laid it over carded wool, backed it, and stitched the 3 layers on a hanging frame. Stitch close. Quilting lines a thumb's width apart hold the batting from shifting cold. One quilt outlasted the children it was made for and went on to theirs. This cost nothing but rags and the patience to join them. Not bought warmth, saved warmth. Number 19. Spinning and weaving wool into cloth. You sheared the sheep in spring, washed the wool, and carded it into soft rolls. You spun it into yarn on a wheel, the thread running out between your fingers as the wheel turned. You wove the yarn into cloth on a loom that took up half the room. Keep an even tension. A thick spot in the thread becomes a weak spot in the cloth. One season's wool clothed a whole family from the sheep in their own field. Mill cloth cost cash and wore through in a year, not store-bought. Grown, spun, and woven by hand. Number 18. Digging ginseng for trade. You knew the plant by its 5-leafed top and red berries. You dug the root hole in the fall without breaking it, then planted the berries back in the hole so the patch would bear again. Dig only the mature plants with 3 prongs or more. Take the young ones and the patch dies out in a season. Dried ginseng brought hard cash from buyers who shipped it across the world for medicine, and a good year's digging bought the shoes and salt the farm could not grow. Not a crop, a secret the woods kept for those who knew it. Number 17. Trapping and snaring for meat and fur. You set deadfalls and snares along the runs where rabbit and groundhog moved. You read the trail for fresh sign and set the trap where the animal already walked, not where you wished it would. Set the snare loop at the height of the animal's head and as wide as your fist. If it is too high or too low, the animal walks right through. Trapping. Put meat on the table in the lean months and fur money in the jar. The trap line cost wire and attention, not a hunt for sport. A harvest the mountain owed to the patient. Number 16. Making lye soap from wood ash and hog fat. You saved hardwood ashes all winter in a hopper and poured water through to leach out the lye. You tested it by floating an egg. When it bobbed up the size of a quarter, it was strong enough. You boiled the lye with rendered fat until it traced thick, then poured it to set and cut it into bars. Stir one direction only and steady, or the soap separates and never sets. A year of soap from ashes and fat, too poor to eat, not bought clean, made clean. Number 15, tanning a hide into leather. You fleshed the green hide clean of every scrap of fat and meat. You soaked it, worked the hair off, and rubbed it with a paste of the animal's own brains and warm water. You stretched it on a frame and worked it soft as it dried, then smoked it low to set it. Keep the hide moving as it dries. A hide left still goes stiff as a board and never comes back. One deer hide made gloves, laces, hinges, and patches for a year. This came off an animal already taken for meat. Not waste, every part used. The average American family now spends near $1,000 a month at the grocery store and $200 more on household goods. Look hard at what that money buys. A $4 jar of honey from a hive that cost a hollow log. A $6 bar of soap that ashes and grease once made for nothing. A winter of food sold back, can by can, that a root cellar and a salt barrel once kept for free. You are not paying for materials. You are paying for one idea, sold steady for 70 years, that making things yourself is quaint, slow, and beneath you. The knowledge was not lost. It was suppressed, one purchase at a time, because a family that makes what it needs is not a customer. It is a market that walked away. Number 14, keeping a spring house to cool milk and butter. You built a small stone house over the cold spring where it came out of the hill. You set crocks of milk and butter down in the running water, which held near 50 degrees year-round, and the current carried the heat away and kept the food sweet for days. Set the crocks where the water runs, not in a still pool. Moving water pulls the heat. Standing water lets it sit. The spring house was the family's only cold storage. Later, they were sold an icebox, then a machine that hummed and drew a bill every month. This hummed nothing, just placed where the cold already was. Number 13, rendering lard and tallow from the hog. At the hog killing, you cut the fat into chunks and cooked it down slow in a great iron kettle over an outdoor fire, stirring steady as the fat melted clear and the cracklings browned and dropped. You strained the hot lard into crocks to keep all year. Render it slow over a low fire, because if you let it scorch, the whole batch tastes burnt and turns rancid by spring. One hog gave the cooking fat, the candle tallow, and the soap grease for a year. This came off the same hog that fed them, not bought by the pound, saved by the kettle. Number 12, cooking sorghum down into molasses. You grew a patch of cane and cut it at first frost. You stripped the leaves, crushed the stalks through a mule-powered mill to press the green juice, and boiled that juice down in a long, flat pan for hours. You skimmed the foam off steady until it ran thick and amber. Keep the fire even and skim without stopping. Let it scorch in one spot, and the whole run tastes of smoke. A day at the mill made a year of sweetening for cornbread and biscuits. This grew in their own field, not store sugar, the mountain's own sweetness, cooked down by hand. Number 11, making apple butter over the open kettle. You picked the windfall apples no one would buy, cooked them to sauce, and spooned them into a great copper kettle over a fire in the yard. You stirred with a long wooden paddle for hours so it would not stick, while the family took turns at the handle. Never stop stirring once it thickens. A kettle left untended scorches on the bottom and ruins the whole day. One kettle put up enough apple butter to last the winter on the breakfast table. This came from apples that would have rotted on the ground. Not bought, saved from waste. Number 10, making kraut in the crock. You shredded the fall cabbage fine, salted it heavy, and packed it down hard into a stone crock until its own brine rose over the top. You waited it under a plate and stone in the cool dark for weeks. Keep the cabbage under the brine. Any leaf that lifts into the air spoils and turns the whole crock. The kraut kept all winter and gave the family something green and sharp when the garden lay under snow. This cost a head of cabbage and a handful of salt, not preserved by a factory, preserved by salt and thyme. Number 9, drying apples and beans, leather breeches. You sliced the apples thin and strung the green beans whole on a long thread with a needle. You hung them in the sun until they dried hard and leathery, then stored them dry for winter. Dry them fast in good air. Apples left damp in a thick pile will mold from the inside before they ever cure. A string of dried apples and a sack of leather breeches fed a family fruit and vegetables in February. This cost a needle, a thread, and a week of sun. Not bought out of season, saved in season for the lean one. There is a woman past 90 now, born in a cove not far from where the park line was drawn, who learned all of this at her mother's side before she was 12. She can still string a bean, set a kraut crock, and tell good lard from bad by the smell of the kettle. No one has asked her to teach it. Her great-grandchildren buy their soap and their bread and their cloth, and they would not know where to start. When she is gone, the recipes might survive in a church cookbook on a shelf. The hands will not. Your grandmother carried those hands. They were not trained in a class. They were built by a mother who said, "Stand here and watch me do this once." Number 8, herbal remedies for when no doctor came. You learned the healing plants from the woman who raised you. Mullein leaf steeped into tea for a deep cough. Yarrow packed onto a cut to slow the bleeding. Boneset for the fever and chills. Spring greens to build a tired body back up. Gather each herb in its right season. A root pulled at the wrong time of year carries half its strength or none. The nearest doctor was a hard day's ride, so the woods were the only pharmacy. These grew wild and free, not prescribed, gathered and known. Number 7, foraging the first spring greens. You went to the woods in early spring, hungry for green after a winter of dried and salted food. You dug ramps from the damp hillsides for their wild onion bite. You picked poke salad shoots, young and creasy greens from the creek banks. Boil poke through 2 changes of water before you eat it. The raw plant and the old growth will make you sick. The first greens of spring broke the long brown winter and brought iron back into a worn-down family. These came up free on the mountain every March. Not produce, the woods waking up and feeding you again. Number 6, storing the harvest in the root cellar. You dug a cellar into the cool bank of the hill, lined it with stone, and roofed it over with earth. You laid the potatoes, turnips, cabbages, and apples down in straw, where the cold held just above freezing all winter. One bad apple touching the others spreads the rot through the whole bin. Pull it the day you see it. The root cellar kept a garden's harvest sound from October clear to spring. Not bought fresh, kept fresh in the ground. Number 5, salt curing and smoking the hog. After hog killing, you rubbed the hams and shoulders heavy with salt and packed them down to draw the moisture out for weeks. Then you hung them in the smokehouse over a slow smolder of hickory and let the cool smoke work into the meat for days. Use a cold smoke, not a hot fire. Heat cooks the meat and spoils it, but cool smoke cures it to keep. A single hog, cured this way, fed a family meat through a whole year without a lick of ice. Not bought meat. The winter's whole protein, put up by salt and smoke. Number 4, banking the fire to never lose your coals. Before bed, you raked the live coals into a tight heap at the back of the hearth and covered them with a blanket of ash. The ash choked the air down to almost nothing and held the coals alive and breathing all night. In the dark before dawn, you raked the ash off and fed the orange embers a curl of dry bark. Bank them deep and tight, coals spread thin and loosely covered burn out cold by morning. A fire kept this way never went out, and matches cost money and ran out. They were not relit each day. Never let them die. Number 3, finding and keeping a living spring. You read the land for water, a green seep on a dry hillside, the cool air off a hollow, the plants that only grow where it is wet. You dug back into the hill to the source, walled it with stone so it ran clean and steady, and kept the cattle off it so it never fouled. Dig back to the rock and let the water find its own level. Chase it too hard, and you stir up the mud for a season. A good spring watered a family for 100 years and never sent a bill. Today, a man pays a well company $300 to drill and guess. The mountain showed the old-timer where the water already was, not drilled, found. Number 2, chinking and banking the cabin against winter. You raked the failed daubing out from between the logs down to sound wood. You packed the gaps with scrap and troweled in fresh clay and lime to shed the rain. In the fall, you banked the base with earth and leaves against the cold. Strike the chinking on a slope so the rain runs off. Pack it flat, and the water sits, freezes, and breaks it out by spring. A finger-wide gap bled a winter's worth of heat you split by hand. The logs were sound chestnut. Only the chinking had failed. He filled the gaps, and the cabin held its warmth. Number 1, learning at the elbow and knowing it for life. That is the whole list. Every skill from 25 down to 2 was learned the same way. Not from a book, not from a class. A child stood at a parent's elbow and watched a thing done with 2 hands. The soap stirred, the beans strung, the coals banked, the spring found, and watched it again, and then did it. Clumsy at first, until the hands knew it without being told. That was the whole inheritance of mountain life. Not the land, which the park took. Not money, which there never was. The certainty that you could make what you needed and mend what you had was built one watched and repeated task at a time. Your grandmother carried that certainty as her ordinary state. No one trained her. She learned it the only way it can be learned. That certainty cannot be ordered to your door. It can only be built. Stand here, watch, then do it yourself. None of these skills needed money, a license, or another man's permission. They needed only someone who paid attention to the place that kept him alive, who tasted the lye on the egg, who heard the spring run clean. That was the real inheritance of these mountains. Not the coves, not the cabins, the certainty that your own 2 hands could feed you, warm you, and heal you when no one was coming. We did not lose the tools. The kettle is still in the shed. The crock is still on the shelf. We lost the voice that once stood beside us and said, "Watch me do it this one time, and you will know it for the rest of your life." That voice is what the industry hoped you would forget. The families of these mountains spoke it fluently, and anyone who carried it could walk onto hard ground with empty hands and by spring want for nothing they could not make themselves.